Disclaimer, I am not a licensed medical professional. This podcast is not intended to replace real medical support from a mental health professional or other licensed medical practitioner. If you are in crisis and need immediate support, call 911 or reach out to Suicide Prevention Hotline at 988.
Hello and welcome to Dare2Talk, where we strive to bring some positivity to your day. I'm Dare, and we are joined today by
MistyDawn.
There you go, by Mother MistyDawn. Welcome. So before we get into the meat of every episode, we always do a mindful moment. And my mother, I'm going to invite you actually to also join us in this mindful moment. We are going to be doing a deep breathing exercise. We are going to be taking 3 deep breaths in through our nose and out through our mouths. And we're going to try to make sure that it's that deep diaphragmatic breathing that we've talked a lot about, the stuff that goes down into your belly. If you are wanting to ensure that you are doing it correctly, you can put a hand on your chest and a hand on your abdomen. The hand on your abdomen should rise. The hand on your chest should stay relatively still. I'm going to invite you to get into a comfortable position. Laying, sitting, standing, doesn't matter so long as you are comfortable. And if you are comfortable and safe to do so, I'm also going to invite you to close your eyes. Let's close our eyes, get into our position. Ready? Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. Last one. Breathe in. And out. And you can open your eyes. Thank you for joining me in this mindful moment. Now, as we stated, I am joined today by my mother, MistyDawn. Hello. How are you doing today?
Well, I've been better, but that's okay. So I wanted to let you know I am having some breathing stuff. As you know, I see the pulmonologist in a few weeks. So for me, your breathing, I'm a 2-for-1er. So 2 breaths to your 1, and that's okay.
It is definitely okay. I also have mentioned in the past, so we say usually best practices in through the nose, out through the mouth. But I know I've mentioned in other episodes that some people have a hard time breathing in through their nose. And I know I've specifically mentioned you. And
Yes.
if that is the case, breathing in and out of our mouth is okay. You want to tell us a little bit about why it might be hard for you to breathe through your nose when we're doing deep breaths?
I was actually born with no left sinuses. And so they had to go in and reconstruct them. And then when they had it all fixed, my son, your brother, and I were playing, and he came and he popped me right like this on accident. It was an accident. He popped like this, and it broke my nose here and here in 2 places and shifted this over. So actually, if you look real close at my face, my nose is crooked. And so it doesn't always get the airflow through there. And so I tend to get sinus infections also when they did the surgery. They left a hole inside this middle part septum, and it'll get like gook and stuff in it. And that sits and gets infected really, really easy. So I just don't have all that little hairs and little things that most normal sinuses are supposed to have. So it's hard for me to breathe out of my nose sometimes. Fun fact, Darian, I don't know if you've told your listeners this or not, but your nose actually takes turns. Sometimes it's the left side that breathes, sometimes it's the right side that breathes. So it takes turns. So I actually do much better when my nose on the right side is taking its turn. But when it's the left side's turn, forget it. It don't want to do it.
I did not know that. That is a fun
A
fact,
fun
actually.
fact
Thank
for
you for
you.
sharing that.
Yeah.
So, this platform, as you are aware, is a foundation where we are talking about mental health and mental health practices, stress management, And we also are trying to tie that a little bit into disability. We haven't gotten a whole lot into the disability portion of it yet, but I do know that I've talked a little bit about my own disability, my Balo's concentric sclerosis, and I've also talked about my own mental health disability with borderline personality disorder.
Fun
I
times as a
know
parent. Ha ha. Not
I'm going to ask you a little bit about that later, but right now I want to
sure.
know your own journey with disabilities. What are you willing to share as far as disabilities, both mental health and physical disabilities that you might have to contend with?
Well, you know a lot of my history, and I won't share too much about my siblings. I will say, though, that when my parents got a divorce on my dad's side of the family, I was raised by them. Any of my siblings on that side of the family manifest different physical symptoms um, to various degrees, but all three of us are seriously impacted. So there is something to be said about the environment that you were raised in. Your dad and I tried really hard not to have that be the case for you. However, as you shared in the bush of Alaska, things were happening that we were not aware of at the time. And so your environment does play part in some of your early development stuff. I was diagnosed uh, earlier in my lifetime, and I had symptoms even from when I could remember of a disease called Crohn's disease, which at the time was fairly new, and that really played an impact in my digestion system, how I developed, how I absorb nutrients from foods, that kind of thing. What I also know is that a lot of the water that my brother and I were exposed to before we were 5 years old was contaminated with oil. So we were poisoned a lot as children. And then it wasn't much better when we got the well house for our drinking water because they never changed the outside hosing system for the garden and all the food we were growing. And we grew pretty much all of our own food. And so it was all over our fruits and our vegetables and in the foods we ate, oil contamination was. So it definitely played an impact on physical illnesses and my immune system and all those things. Also, though, life happens. When I was 14, I got in a really bad car crash, and that caused a lot of physical symptoms. And that was the beginning of my event, so to speak, for developing what later I would find out to be fibromyalgia. And there's a lot of misconceptions about the illness and the disease. I like to tell people I have the real one because it took 5 doctors to diagnose, and it actually got me down to the Mayo Clinic. In that whole scheme of things, I've had broken bones. My skull's been broken. I've got some scarring up here, which has impacted my sleep ability to sleep correctly in my sleep cycles. And so all of those things kind of are a storm for lots of physical pain, tiredness, sleep issues. With my Crohn's disease, really active. I will say now it's so much in remission. There have been some specialists who want to say I was misdiagnosed. However, I have a really hard time thinking that 40 years of seeing it in colonoscopies and all the ones that I had and everything is a misdiagnosis. I'd like to prefer to say that there is something to be going gluten free. That's what helped me. And some of the medication I was on at the time was more experimental type medication. And it worked for me. So I'd like to say that it's treated. So that's good news. However, at the time that you guys were born, I was told that I could never have children and that if I did, it was a very high risk situation. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. Your illnesses, a lot of what you got, I think, came from my dad's family. My dad and his grandmother, I think, are the ones that are carrying the gene for your MS diagnosis that you got. Um, but we just didn't know. As you've probably mentioned, your illness wasn't actually understood or diagnosable until about 5 years ago. So,
Yeah.
yeah. But no, I've been disabled since I can remember. Some of my earliest memories when I was 3 years old, I got my finger pricked. They were taking my blood. My iron was always really, really low, and my blood markers for different kinds of protein and vitamins and stuff. I had deficiencies, and then I was put on a regimen of vitamins, which was a good thing. My grandparents made sure I took lots of vitamins as a child, but I remember it was really difficult to swallow the pills, and they did not actually have a multivitamin at the time I was a kid. So I was a handful child. Even then, I had like 20 different vitamins that I have to take every day, multiple times a day, for my system. And then that lasted until I was about 9 years old. And then from about 9 till 17, I didn't really get much in the way of that care. And then 17, we started poking and prodding and blood taking. I used to say, if you look at my arm, you'd think I was a druggie because I got all the scars from so many blood things. I had my first colonoscopy when I was in 6th grade, and my second one when
Pleasant.
I was 17. I had the full one. In the 6th grade, I had a half one, and they misdiagnosed me with some other illness. And then when I was 17, I had my first full colonoscopy, and then I've probably had about 15 colonoscopies now. I'm 51 now. So,
Jeez.
yeah.
So I know that sometimes with your fibromyalgia and with kind of some of the other stuff that you have had going on, sometimes you get really sleepy
Yes.
days.
And
I remember
you and Austin would talk about, when you were about 9 years old, you thought I was dying. I thought I was gonna die. So did your dad. So did you
in
guys.
middle school, yeah.
Uh-huh, and that's when my thyroid stopped working.
Mhm.
And, again, it was one of those things where I remember going to several doctors, and the doctors would say, "It sounds like your thyroid." They take blood test, but my thyroid would look fine on paper. And I will
Right.
never forget, there was a doctor who she was a Western MD, but she also did a lot of natural homeopath stuff as well.
But yeah, the
And
quack.
she well, we call her the quack, but she did save my life because she
Yeah.
was the first one that got that test back and said, I treat the patient, not the paperwork. Let's try this thyroid medication. Now, it
Mhm.
was the wrong medication to treat it, and it took me 2 years with an endocrinologist to fix that. However, she
Mhm.
was the first one to actually, like,
Take you
treat
seriously.
treat me
Yeah.
and take me more serious than my blood work, and that made a big difference. And then later on with more research, they figured out that my thyroid was acting like, they said it was like a school hallway. The hallway was really long, and the blood
Mhm.
tests were measuring the hallway, and the hallway looked fine. The problem was in my body, all the doors were shut and locked. And so even though it was in the hallway, it wasn't getting to the body where it needed to be, all the hormones and things. So that was a long journey there, and it affected me greatly. And they actually thought at the time I might have MS, and um, they did a lot of tests. I did not have it, which was why it was so surprising and not something we look for right away with you, with your symptoms, is because I was like, hey, they thought I had MS at about her age, and I didn't have any of that. So, but that's also where they found a lot of the damage in my skull from various accidents. There for a while, I thought it was from the car crash. And then later on, the doctors were like, there's no way that a car crash of any kind would cause that kind of injury. They said the only kind of thing that would do that is if there was like a nail on a board and someone like hit you straight on with that nail, like right there. And they said that's really what it would take to cause that kind of an injury. And then I would probably not remember it because, that kind of blunt force to cause that much damage would cause me to pass out, and I'd probably have amnesia of the event. So, and then, a couple other illnesses started. My voice, obviously, as you know, some of the year I have to do sign language. I damaged all these muscles and stuff because I use muscles to talk. You'll see it. You'll see
Mhm.
it when I talk, and it damaged my swallowing. And then, um, that's been a new one that I've had to, go through, and, it caused vocal issues, and that's why I had to stop teaching and do all that stuff. And then, yeah, it's kind of been new things, uh, along the way that have developed that, little things like squatting down, picking up a book off a bookshelf, and shearing your meniscus so bad that you wind up with surgery a year later. Right now, I got a shoulder injury that's been over a year, that they're on the fence. They were like, "Well, for a normal person, it'd be 50-50 for surgery. For you, it's not healing." I just had it injected again today, and And so yeah, sleep is back to sleep. Tiredness started, I remember in 10th grade talking to my dad saying, I'm really, really tired. I just don't ever remember feeling this tired all the time.
Mhm.
And I remember, my senior year falling asleep a lot in class. Of course, I was on medication at the time. I did not know I was allergic to it. So that didn't help. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. And now I'm thankful that I had my children young because I don't think I could do the sleepless nights now anymore. I don't
Right.
architect right. So I stay asleep. I fall asleep. Well, I say I stay asleep because, fun fact, you have to actually wake up for 20 seconds to recognize that you're awake. And so even though I have these micro bursts of being awake, I'm never awake for 20 seconds enough to know I'm awake. And I'm excited now because there's a new medication out. I'll have to try it for a month, but it's actually the first medication that works on the actual cyclings of sleep. Sometimes I don't REM, so I don't restore my sleep. A lot of times that is also part of what I call the real fibromyalgia. It is a full body systemic illness. Sleep is a major, major component of it. And then as I've gotten older, as you know, in my mid 30s, I was a few years older than you. Actually, more towards my 40s is when I first developed my first seizure from my body being constantly kind of in this debilitating pain and flux and all that. So it's been struggling. It's really difficult to get older, but we're doing
I
it.
definitely yeah,
But
I
that's why
hear
I have to
that.
drink it. Mhm.
So, you have already mentioned, the doctor that first, found your stuff. If I remember correctly, that doctor actually was the first one to, do the dopamine test on me and realize that my dopamine was pretty low as well, and I think that was around the time that, you guys started looking at getting professional help for me. What was some of the things, behaviors and stuff you saw during that time for me that made you go, "Oh, we should probably get her some help."
Well, we have to start a little sooner than that.
By all means,
Um,
tattle.
okay. You were an interesting baby. You are the oldest of
Mhm.
both of our children,
Yeah.
and you were a very interesting baby. You fought sleep so hard, and there were nights where we were up, and I would have to go in when you were trying to take a nap or something. I'd sit there on the floor with my arms crossed, going, "Lay down. Stop moving. No. Close your eyes. Lay down. No, I'm not playing. Lay down. Close your eyes. Be quiet. Close your eyes." And it didn't matter. I mean, it was worse if I held you. Now we're talking about when you could stand when you were a toddler that I did that. Now, when you were a baby, you and I in particular, and you and your dad spent a lot of time rocking and rocking and rocking and rocking and holding and squatting. You also were very interesting because you never liked to be like swaddled. You never
Mhm.
liked to be tied in, and most babies love that, and you did not at
It
all.
just feels too restrictive.
Yeah, you couldn't as a baby even, you didn't want it. Now you could have your legs okay, but you always had to have at least one arm out to kinda flail around, and you flailed a lot. You moved a lot. You moved a lot even as a baby, and then as a toddler, you move around. Now when you trying to go to sleep, you spin and turn and toss and move and are
Mhm.
everywhere. We knew that you were very strong about how you were feeling. Like if you were happy, you weren't just happy, you were like ecstatic happy. And when you're sad, you were really, really sad. And you didn't have a lot of in between emotions, even as a child. And you weren't ever really even killed. The other thing we noticed when you were about 4 or 5 is that you would go to really quick extremes. Like you could switch emotions really fast. Like you'd be really happy and then really sad and then really happy. It was like an emotional, like, oh, and you felt almost like a blender because you never knew from moment to moment what emotion you were going to get. And we knew that. I mean, looking back, even as a baby with the swing, when you would fall asleep in your swing, and we had the crank swing, we didn't have the thing. We only could have this crank. I don't think the electric ones were out quite yet, and if they were way at the water park swing. And we would be, like, climbing over the couch and rushing, "No, no, no, crank it, she's gonna wake up, oh my god, wake up," like, and so we were always really, really scared for you to wake up when you were in the middle of sleeping because we knew that it was never a small matter with you. We were gonna cry for hours, and we weren't gonna be okay for many, many times. Now, you never, crawled as a child, interestingly enough. You were about 5 months old when you just started walking everywhere, and the doctor didn't believe me that you were walking, and here you are, a little, you know, thing, and I put you down. Even at 3 months, you'd hold my fingers, but then by 5 months, you were like, "Tip, tip, 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 tip," just everywhere. You never crawled. Not one day did you ever crawl, and I was really kinda disappointed because I was like, "But I like crawling babies with diaper." I wanted to see you crawl, and you just never did.
To
Um,
be stubborn even as a child.
you were and that's what we thought. We thought, "Well, you're just very stubborn, you're a very passionate person, and so we just assumed that you were this princess, kind of the world revolved around you, and you were the first grandbaby and the first great grandbaby, and so everybody kinda just spoiled you, and we just thought, well, she's just a princess and she's spoiled, and that's just her. And then we went to the bush of Alaska. You were 4.5 years old. And one of the first days that we were there, one of the first weekends, we went out to a reburial ceremony. And that's kind of the first time that we knew, Houston, we got a problem here. This child is like beyond normally what you would anticipate. Like, I remember some of the natives called you white, and you were trying to convince them that no, you were Indian because in our family line is Oklahoman Indians from Oklahoma. Now, Alaskan natives don't qualify us. They see us as white people. We're not Native Alaskans and we're not Native Indian.
And I only have, like, a tiny little drop of native in me.
You do. I have a lot more than you, but
Yeah.
no, but yes. Yes, you do. And, anyway, needless to say, they called you white and you were like, "Nuh-uh, I'm Indian." And then you just lost it and tears and just tears and tears of, and you're like a 4.5-year-old, "Don't call me that, no, no." And you just took it to a whole new level. There was no calming you down, no consoling you, no nothing.
I vaguely remember
So
this.
oh my gosh. So we knew then, so we worked a lot because we were in the bush of Alaska in a village, like 200 people. What are you going to do, right? So
Yeah.
we knew that we would support you extra there. So the counselor was really great,
Oh, I
and her
remember
first
her,
name was
yeah.
Sherry.
Uh-huh.
And Sherry was put on Darien watch. So when Sherry would come into the classroom and work with the kids, she was specifically also looking for more things and working more with you in a way that was kind of under the radar, undercover, so that you didn't know. And sometimes she would pull you aside and you got really comfortable going to her. So you would sometimes during school, a lot of times actually, you would say, I need to go talk to Sherry. And you and Sherry developed a pretty close relationship. And we did that on purpose for you.
Yeah.
And then we thought that that might be enough support. And then when we moved from the bush to the road system, um,
We learn differently.
you were in 5th grade by then. You were going into 5th grade. And
Mm.
for the first couple weeks, we knew like you had to be asked to leave the classroom, but it was because you were eating food that smelled like seal oil and things like that.
Oh, the
We thought,
fish,
well,
the dried fish.
maybe it's just native, and we had taken you on vacations and trips and things around family. And we thought, well, maybe it's just, she'll grow out of it or she'll get better or whatever. And then it was about midway through 5th grade that we realized no amount of getting you used to Western society again is going to help you here. And then it was time to go to middle school. And so we purposely put you in a middle school where your dad was teaching because he knew the counselors there better and things. And then we'd get the phone call starting in sixth grade,
Yeah.
mid fifth grade, sixth grade, that we get that phone call every year at the beginning of the year from the counselor. Hey, I just wanted to talk to you about your daughter. I noticed some things that are concerning. It's like, yeah, we're very aware. We understand this is what we're doing now and this is what we're doing then. And then we started having conversations about medications and not medications. And your dad and I felt in middle school that your body was going through so many changes and developments that we didn't want to just throw medication on you. We knew you were getting a good support system. We knew you were able to function in a classroom setting enough that eventually we'd work this through and we'd work through problems and then we'd help you at home and you had you had the normal teenage stuff but then more and
Mm-hmm.
more some like the time your friends voted you off the table. That was very devastating for you. Yeah, I'll let you tell that story some other time. That was a heartbreaker for you.
That was
Friends
great.
coming and going was a heartbreaker. You tend to gravitate more towards the troubled kids that didn't necessarily
Fit
bode
in as
well for
well.
your
Yeah.
future with alcoholic tendencies, things like that. So we had to keep a very strict eye on you. Um and really kind of, at the time phones were not a thing, but if they were, we'd have a tracker on you and tracker. I mean, you were treated a little differently than your brother in a lot of ways in that regard, just because we knew the people you were hanging out with. Um, and so we monitored you more. We had a lot more spies per se in your life than even you knew. We had other teachers. Anytime you had teachers, the teachers down the hall, next, everywhere you went in the school, we had someone looking out for you. And you were on
No.
videotape. Yes, and you didn't like it very much because you couldn't get away with anything. But we had
Never.
to take the measures we did, and then we pushed you to do things, like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember you being so mad at me when I'd have you get out of the car to go tell your dad something in the gym when he was coaching because you just didn't feel socially like that, and, like, when we were at public places together, I would embarrass you on purpose. Um, I made I made you do things outside of your comfort zone, even in Golovin, I made you do things. We went hiking
Mm.
one time in Golovin and you were so scared and so upset. So I pushed it and I went
The
across
log out over the water with the rock
over
thing.
the water that you thought, I mean, it was like this deep water, and you were just convinced I was going to fall off and drown. And I was a hiker. I had really good balance. Of course, I wasn't doing anything I didn't know that I was okay with, that I was I was taking my precaution. I wasn't walking on slippery, stuff. So I'd fall and because you can drown.
Yeah.
But you were just beyond terrified, beyond, and I would do things like that to give you those kind of pushes and nudges and I always, I nudged you to get your driver's license. You didn't want to do it. I said, you're going to do it. And if you don't want to use it, that's fine. We'll put it away. You won't, but you are going to get it. And I pushed you a lot as a child. And then we started taking you to counselors. It was right towards the end of your eighth grade year. You had some stuff happen at church camp. And we said, okay, it's time to actually get a diagnosis on this at this point because your emotions you were showing enough consistency in your behavior and patterns that we could get a good read on you. And so we took you to a counselor, but we didn't take the first diagnosis, thank goodness, because they misdiagnosed you. Um, and I had enough at that point. I was healthier. Um, and we weren't sure there also that some of your emotions weren't from what was happening with me because again, you took things very, very close to heart and the whole time that it looked like I was gonna die. I mean, you took that
It
really
looked like you were gonna die. It was
well.
scary.
It did to me too. So, all of us thought that. But and I was prepared to do that. I was prepared, and then I had the friend, you call her the quack. I feel as if she did a lot of good, but
She does.
she in some ways did save my life because I was prepared not to go to I was tired of doctors at that point, tired of all of it, and, no answers, no help, and just getting sicker and sicker, and, I had a friend come and say, "Hey, you got another month before you quit teaching, before you go home and just lay down and call it quits. What's it gonna hurt? Just see this one last doctor." And I said, "I will see one more, and that's it." And that was the beginning of the change that, really did pull me back from the brink of death, and it now has made me more aware that of some things, and I learned a lot through that, and there's a movie I like to talk about it. We talked about it, you and I, today, of, Brain on Fire. It's a good movie,
Yes.
how doctors are humans, and it puts it into perspective of, just because doctors write you off, which is what they were doing at the time for me, um, it doesn't mean that there might not be another doctor around the corner. So with you, it helped a lot because when they made diagnoses so quick, like after a 15-minute conversation of, "Oh, well, you've got this symptom, so you must have this." It was like,
Mhm.
"No."
I
So
remember we went to a second doctor, and the second doctor
yeah.
gave a different diagnosis, and that's the diagnosis that has stuck, actually, and been
Well,
tested.
yes, because we went to a third and fourth doctor, you might not know, that reassessed and confirmed
Oh, I
second
did not
doctor's
know that.
opinion. And
Yeah.
then it was a matter of, okay, now that we know what we're dealing with, where does medication fit in all that? And we still at that time decided, after researching the illness and stuff, that it was better not to medicate you at that time.
Mhm.
Not that you wouldn't have benefited from it, because you would have. However, we had so much support in place for you at that point, and
Mhm.
so many people on your side that knew you and loved you and wanted to help you succeed, that we knew that later on, when you were in college and things, if you needed the medication at that point, we wanted it to have the best chance of helping you then. And until then, your dad and I had you until we didn't. And then if we ever got to that point, of course, we would have medicated, but we felt pretty good about it. First of all, you had a really, really hard time lying, even as a child.
I still do. I don't like lying.
You couldn't lie worth nothing. I mean, I remember the time in early high school you tried to be bulimic, and I quote tried, because your dad and I knew what you were doing. And we
Yeah.
gave you about a week to fess up, and
Yeah.
you broke at about 7 days.
Yeah. I
And,
did
it was at
actually end up
the restaurant.
developing I did end up developing and being semi-diagnosed with eating disorder now, but yeah, for
Yeah, that's
sure.
now. At
No.
what, 32, because you weren't
Yeah.
getting, and we were watching you so close, you weren't getting away with nothing.
No,
And
I know.
so you were bulimic once. I knew about your cutting. I didn't know how serious it was,
Self-harm. Yeah.
and I didn't know until your junior year in high school some of the things that had happened in the bush. So I
Mhm.
knew things had happened, I just didn't know exactly how bad, because you weren't willing or wanting to talk about it, and it was not from lack of us trying to get you to talk about it, but we figured, you would talk about it when you were ready, and, we did provide you with counseling. After that, I don't know if you remember, we took you to see a talk therapist person for a
Mhm.
while, so that we were like, well, if you couldn't tell us until now, let's have you be a safe place. And you actually went to play therapy for a little bit,
Mhm.
where they had you draw, things like that. Again, we went that route knowing that medication has its place. And in fact, I don't know if you remember, in college, you went to college in Oklahoma and I was in Alaska, and I said, "My gosh, you go down and get you on some medication, and if you are not on 3 days, I'm coming down there and we're gonna take
And
care of it, and
getting
you're not gonna
me
like
on
me when I get
medication.
there, because you are getting out
Yeah,
of
it
that bed."
got bad in college for a moment there, I do remember
Yeah,
that. And
yeah,
I
and
did go
you
get on
told me.
medication, yeah. And then I
Yeah,
went
you
and got
told
it on the
me. So that was something else that your dad and I really, really instilled in you, is to open those lines of communications to where it was okay to talk to us, and that it was an illness. And then that was something, when you went to college, there was some kind of misunderstandings between your grandparents and I and your
Mhm.
dad, because they only saw you like on vacation, like for a week here and there. And so when I told them, make sure she gets a support team down there. She's got all these people on her team up here. She needs to get a counselor. She needs to get to where she can get some medications, all that. They tried to convince you that that it was your dad and I telling you had illnesses and it wasn't you. And your dad and I got into it pretty heavy over that. And I said, look, here's the thing. Either it's an illness or it's not an illness. So either way, this is what it boils down to. If it is not an illness, then Darian has no reason to feel the thing she's feeling and be the way she is, other than she's just crazy, or she's blowing it up out of proportion, or she's making it up. That's not really helpful. Okay. If it is an illness, then we're correct. She's dealt with it her whole life. It's an illness. There's a place for medication in this. She was diagnosed with it by doctors. She's dealt with lots of symptoms along the way. It's something that isn't going to go away. It's part of who she is. She's not crazy. It's just something that, like, at that point, we had dealt with so much, and your brother had some learning stuff with his dyslexia and things like that, that we got into the saying of, it's a part of something you've got to deal with, but it doesn't define you. And I actually got that line from a movie called Man in the Iron Mask with Leonardo DiCaprio. The line where they put him back in the mask and everybody was afraid that he was going to go crazy. And he was like, I wear the mask. It doesn't wear me. So the illness is part of who you are, but it doesn't define you as a human being and a person. And that's a much different way of looking at it than I'm just crazy and I just must be making this up because nothing's wrong with me. And I don't really, those are not the same way of looking at your illness. And so it basically came to a point in your life at that time where you had to make that choice of, what do you believe the truth is? And do you believe, your 22-year history at that point and all the things that have happened to you and all the ways that we've tried to help you and talk about it and things. And that, yes, there are people with this illness. This is a real thing. It does exist. It is something, just like my stuff, yes, I have physical illness. Yes, I have arthritis. And now that's the good thing about your MS and the arthritis in a way, is because you can see it. It's on test. Like you looking at me wouldn't necessarily say, and at that point I had gotten a lot of, you're too old to be hurting so bad. You're too old to have to stretch so much. You're too old to, kind of walk and hobble sometimes, and it's
Or
like,
too
yeah, I'm glad
young.
I look that good. And
Yeah.
you and I would have conversations of, would we have preferred an illness like a cleft palate where you can see it, or an arm being cut off so everyone can see it? Or do we like the fact that sometimes we can hide our illnesses in this somewhat normal looking body? And just like, with your MS, it makes it easier in some ways because you can actually see the damage in the brain. You can see the lesions. I can see the arthritis. I can see, the neck muscles. And then there's the things like the fibro pain or your BPD that you can't see it. There's no like imaging, but it doesn't make it less real.
Yeah. We still have the
And
symptoms.
the symptoms are real symptoms. But
Mhm.
there are, again, a lot of people, again, with fibro, who'll say, oh yeah, my back hurt in this one spot. So the doctor pushed right here and said I had the worst case of fibro right there ever, just in my back. And I'm like, it doesn't actually work that way. If you have fibro, you're not going to have just one spot in your back. That's not how that, and that's definitely not the diagnosis for it. There's a plethora of things that, it's going to affect your sleep, your body. And then you put on top of there my mental illness on top of that. We didn't even talk about that yet.
Mhm.
Um, it's a very interesting thing. So you got everybody from they don't believe you to, yeah, okay, maybe you have BPD, but it's not that bad, or a misunderstanding of what the illness is, or here's the one I personally got offended at. You know this, I found a book on borderline personality disorder,
Mhm.
and I'd never, for dummies, it was a for dummies book. And I'm like, oh, I've
Yeah.
never seen one of these, so I'm going to get it and I'm going to read it. Well, it had a chapter on parenting and it basically put in there that if you have borderline personality disorder, then you had bad parents. And I'm like, wait a minute
Yeah.
here. Hold the
So it's
phone.
it.
Your dad and I tried really hard. We were not perfect parents, but we tried really hard to be good parents with this. And you have even said, because of the parenting that you had and some of the things we made you do, like even people without the illness couldn't pump their own gas. And you were so happy. You weren't happy at the time, but you were happy later on at 21, 22 when you could pump your own gas,
Mhm.
but my mom didn't understand when we went to buy you your first car how for a normal person your age, they would have been excited. You had a complete meltdown when you bought your first car,
Oh, I
like a
freaked
complete
out.
meltdown. You freaked out big time. And not only
It was
that, but you
scary.
backed into somebody when I'm sitting there going, turn, turn your wheel, turn your wheel. And you're just like, oh, I can't turn my wheel. And I'm like,
I just
literally, you had to turn it this far.
frozen
Like,
in
like
fear.
you just hit the car like this. And I'm just like, oh my God. So what is normal, like normally you freaked out when it was time to go to college. And we had money saved for you, but you hadn't seen it yet. And you were panicked because, oh my God, you had this bill due. And finally, you and I had the moment of, how much do you need? And yes, she needs this much. Put it over in her account. Done. Anything else you need, Derry? And you're like, what? Where did that come from? And I was like, I told you I had the money. So yeah, you've panicked over quite a few things. And then we got to the point where I would argue with you on purpose
Yes.
with the
Love it.
steam out, and people really didn't understand that whole concept at all. I was like, you don't get it. And then the whole popcorn child, some people thought we were making fun of you or being mean to you. And it's like, no, you don't get it. And then you and your dad would flip each other off on purpose. And I didn't even get that as your mom. I was like, that's so rude. What the? And it's like, no,
That's how we said we
that's
love
our
each other.
communication style. And you're all right for a girl. Staying that whole thing that bothered you for years because you thought he wanted a boy. And it was like, oh my gosh. And then you were your daddy's little girl. And we went skiing. And I had come in first before your dad. I had asked you, hey, can you go get me some water? I'm getting you water, mom. And then your dad comes in and it's like, honey, would you go get me that? And you're like, oh, I'll get it for you, dad. I'll get it. And I was like, you will not. You will sit your butt back down. You're not going to treat him better. And so you were not the nicest daughter to me sometimes.
I'm still
And
not the nicest daughter to you sometimes. So I'm so glad you actually brought up the popcorn child because that actually is one
yeah,
of the questions. And I think it is the last question that we have time for.
sure. But do you want to hear about my mental illness? Do you want me to
Let's
mention it on camera?
if you would like to, or we can save it for another interview.
Okay, I think we'll save it for another interview, but I will mention it since we're talking about my disabilities, and
Okay.
this is a mental illness possibility. And it was hard. I didn't share with you until you were in high school, I believe.
Yes.
Even though looking back, you and your brother both, when I was open with you guys about it, were like, yeah. Yeah, I get that. So, a couple things. You have had tremors and seizures, but I actually had them first. Ha, ha, ha. No, but mine's an anxiety disorder, and it is a mental illness. They're called PNES, pseudo non-epileptic seizures, which AKA they are calling a new name now, which I just call them PNS seizures still, but they're coming up with a new name because they have found that the word pseudo non-epileptic seizures makes people think that they're not real seizures, and they are real seizures. So that's
Yeah.
number one.
Yeah. I think they're
But that
starting to
developed
call
later
them
on in life.
functional movement disorder now.
Yeah, something like that. But
Yeah.
my first mental illness actually is it's dissociative identity disorder, and it is a form of multiple personality syndrome. Um, I don't lose consciousness very much. There are moments in times I don't really talk about it much openly because, again, it's a misunderstood thing and there's a lot of stigma about it. But again, I'm very happy and very, very pleased that you're doing this kind of podcast, and I will talk more about it in a future episode, but
Okay.
it is there. And I've dealt with
Thank
that
you.
since I was 3 years old. 3,
Yeah.
3 years old. So,
Yep. Um, yeah, like you said, when you did become open and honest with my brother and I, we both kind of knew, but we didn't like fully know or understand. And it helps so much with communication now. It does.
well, it came out of a conversation with you actually because you were really struggling with some of your symptoms and you were like, "I just feel like I'm crazy. I just feel like I'm nuts." And I'm like, "You're
No.
not nuts." And then we were talking about mental illnesses and how there's all these ones, and you had brought it up, and I was like, "Okay, it's time I tell you something. I'm dealing with this." Now your brother is when we have our interview over it, ask me about your brother on his take of it because he's crazy with it.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep that in mind to ask you about that. So
Oh,
I have
yeah. Sure.
one more question, and this is the last question that I've got for you. Um, Popcorn Child.
Yes.
Where did Popcorn Child come from? Why is Popcorn Child the thing? I mentioned before that you call me your Popcorn Child and that it is a fun little thing, I think. Because my life is like all over the place, but I want to hear from your words, Popcorn Child. Please explain.
Well, it actually was not meant for you to ever know about. It was a way that when you were in middle school, absolutely driving your dad and I absolutely bonkers. It was not easy to raise you. It was so not easy, and you never knew what you were gonna get. And someday you'll have to have your dad on here and interview him on his perspective of you in middle school in particular, because it was something. It was something. I mean, the phone was gonna ring. It was just something. We were in contact a lot with it was something. And I was looking for a way to describe how you were making us feel without it being so negative because we were like, "Oh my god, she's gonna be the death of us. Oh my god. She's driving us nuts. She's just oh my god." And so we wanted something a little bit more positive to kinda base it off of, but we weren't gonna let you know. And about that time, you were saying how your brother was this golden child. We're like, "No, he's not. He's normal. He gets in trouble for normal thing." Now, he did have dyslexia, don't get me wrong. It was hard to teach him how to read and things like that, but you also had dyslexia stuff, but you were able to overcome
Mm.
it. So you were in advanced classes at that time and reading at that time. Now teaching you to read in kindergarten and first grade because I was your kindergarten teacher. That was difficult, I will say. But we kind of expected some of that, and we still didn't quite know because, again, you were our first child of our own. We just kind of thought this is kind of normal. Um, and I heard somebody say it. I can't remember if I heard it on a movie or if I actually heard somebody say it that, yeah, they've got this popcorn child. And I was like, whoa, whoa, wait, wait, wait. And my ears perked up and I listened. They weren't actually really talking to me. And they explained what they meant by it. I was like, oh, that's the word I've been looking for. From now on, Sean, Darian is our popcorn child. That's how, when we're having those days and those moments, we're just gonna be like, "Oh my god, she's our popcorn child." And then that just became more endearing, and it gave us a way to say, "Yeah, this is like watching a movie, sitting back eating popcorn, going, what is gonna happen next? I have no idea." And sometimes that movie was a horror flick, and sometimes that movie was a comedy, and sometimes it was romance, and sometimes it was a coming of age terms or a true life story, and sometimes it was the kid's gonna kill the parent story. I mean, and sometimes it was a series of unfortunate events. Sometimes it was like Harry Potter and he's just getting hammered by the Dursley. I mean, you just never knew. Sometimes this was an action film, Cadet Kelly movie. Who knew that was your wanting to go to that was a big popcorn moment for us when you said, "You remember I liked Cadet Kelly, so I wanted to join the military." I'm like, "Really?" No, she was more about getting out of that kind of school and what kinda how she could wear a bright scarf, not so much like, "I'm for the military life?" So yeah, and then I guess you overheard us saying it more times than we thought. And about the time I was coming clean about my multiple personalities, you asked us, "Hey, mom, I hear popcorn child. What the heck do you mean?" And I'm like, "Well, you see, Darian." we kind of thought you might grow out of it, but it doesn't look like you're going to. You haven't, by the way. You never have grown out of it.
No, I
And
still get you your popcorn moments.
what's interesting is we have two grandchildren. I know this is hard for you to talk about, but you are an awesome aunt. You really struggled with Rowan in particular is the first grandbaby that was born. She's a girl, and
I
it
really
was right
struggled.
after you lost your child,
Mhm.
and you really struggled. But in the end, you did the hard work that you needed to do to have that relationship with her, to be an aunt, to do that. And now what we're finding is, and we warned Angela and Austin both. She is now 6 years old,
Mhm.
and we have seen a lot of similarities. And what's interesting about that is we tried to figure out where you might have gotten your borderline personality, even though I say you got your MS probably from my dad and
Uh-huh.
his grandma side. We're almost positive that your borderline personality disorder comes from your dad's side of the family. In particular, you have an aunt who I will not name for privacy reasons. That is we're pretty sure that you have it from her. And the difference being, and here's the difference, is we were in a social setting, and I remember it was really crowded around the table, and this individual was to my right, and she was getting overstimulated just like you do. And instead of recognizing that, I talked to your dad about this later. I said, if that had been Darian, she would have recognized what was happening, realized it was part of her illness, gotten up, gone outside, taken a moment for herself and saying, I just need a moment. I just need to go away. Same thing on a phone conversation you and I had one today. Even you were like, this is overstimulating me right now. I need to change the subject. We'll go back. And that was a much more respectful way to handle it. And this person doesn't have those coping strategies or skills like you do, or recognize that. And so for them, they just turned to me, and I was not the only one talking, but turned to me and went, shh, be quiet. Oh, it's too much. Stop talking. And I'm like going, huh, well, that was rude. And the fact that the whole table's still talking. So it wasn't really helpful. And
Yeah.
then later on, she felt guilty and felt bad about it and brought it back up and said, I'm sorry I was so rude to you. I didn't mean to be rude. I was just getting overstimulated. And I'm like thinking, yeah, see, that's the difference right there, is that if you had recognized that, yes, you were getting overstimulated, it's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. It just is part of
Mhm.
this illness. And that's what you're dealing with. You could have handled that so much better. And right now in life, where she works and what she's doing is very difficult for her for lots of reasons, that if she would recognize that it might be this illness, and at least go get checked out for it, she might get a different perspective on how to cope and manage. And because right now she's thinking, what's wrong with me? I'm just too overly sensitive. I'm just too dramatic. It's a me issue, and I'm the problem, and I don't know how to handle my life, and she's miserably upset and thinking about quitting a job she loves, because of things that are in transition right now, and she just doesn't know quite how to navigate it very well. And it's much different with you. Uh, that's not to compare, because everybody's different.
Oh, yeah.
But again, it goes back to, if you are open and honest and talk about these things and get the help you need, you can navigate life circumstances and situations a lot differently. Like today, you had a rough day. I know you did. We talked about it on
I
the phone,
did. Yeah.
and you got up, you made a blog post. We're doing this way. And you're figuring that, yeah, it's not perfect necessarily, but today I can't do everything, but I can at least do this,
This. Yes.
instead of a black and white. I can't do this, so it must be me, and I'll never be able to do this, and I can't do anything because I can't. Those are not the same perspectives on life.
No, they're
And I hope
definitely
some of my illnesses and dealing with what I've gone through has helped you with some of these perspective shifts of, there were times where I couldn't get out of bed, but I could do movies, or I could do that. And we've talked about that a lot, of if I've helped you see,
absolutely.
that I'm dealing with this illness, you're dealing with your illnesses, I'm dealing with physical and mental, you are too in different ways,
Sure.
yeah, sometimes I need more medication than other days, but it is part of life, and it sucks. Sometimes it just isn't fun to be part of a handful club all the time. You get really tired and unmotivated and but I am a very resilient person. I'm a persevering person, and
Mhm.
and you and your brother have gotten mad at me before and said, "Why don't you just quit trying to do XYZ?" And I'm like, "Well, then I might as
Yeah.
well die today, because then I'll just be living to die instead of uh,
Living because you wanna live.
living to live." And
Mhm.
when death comes, at what point, but then again, fair. I shouldn't push sometimes so hard, and I should take more rest days sometimes, and so that is good feedback as well. So it's a balance.
Yeah, it's definitely always a balance. I know that there have been a lot of times on these podcasts and on the blog posts that I write where I have definitely credited you and dad for doing a lot towards raising me and showing me, and particularly you with your illnesses, especially now that I have my own. Watching you push through and do things has definitely lit a fire in me to not just want to give up all the time. And I have my moments. We talk sometimes where it sounds like I'm starting to give up, and I'm like, no, I just need to complain, and then I'm gonna get up and do what you always tell me to do and
And that's
figure it
something,
out.
yeah. We can talk about that other time again too, about our triggering your fighting on purpose, blowing off
Yes,
that steam and stuff, and having
for
those moments
sure.
where you just need to just say, "Mom, I'm gonna be okay, but right now I just need to be mad at the world," moments. And
Mm,
and that, I will say, is another thing also for a future episode as well, is having the illnesses I have physically and mentally, they're different.
yeah,
It's not like having multiple personality disorder, uh, trains you on how to have a child with borderline personality disorder.
personality
They're
disorder,
not the
they're not
same.
the same.
Having all the physical illnesses, and there's more than just the fibro and the, gosh, I have a
Mhm.
list like this long, as you know, but having
Yeah,
all that doesn't teach me how to treat or recognize multiple sclerosis. I mean, they're not the same. And so while you and I deal with some similarities, we overlap, that kind of Venn
yeah, we
diagram
both
where we
have the
overlap
pseudo
some.
seizures, we both
Um,
have
we
pain.
don't I don't know what it's like to have some of the pregnancy issues. As well as I do, that neither you or your brother were planned pregnancies.
No, we were
They
not.
just happened. And I haven't had to struggle with some of the things that you have in that area. And so um there's only so much. And then again, you and I have had the conversation of, it boils down to this though: for someone to really understand what I'm going through, and I had to come to terms with this with your father. For him to really get it, then he'd have to walk in my shoes. And that means he has to have the things that I have to the degree I have. And I would not wish that on him,
Wouldn't wish it
ever,
on anyone.
ever.
No.
And so be careful. You've got to kind of keep that in perspective of, yeah, you want some sympathy here and there. At the same time, they're not. And I talked to you about that when you first got diagnosed with MS. Is I'm like, okay, now you and I can relate on a different level than your brother or your dad will ever be able to understand until they get something like this, that you have to deal with for life, that may or may not kill you, that definitely significantly impacts you in your daily
Yeah.
life. And as you know, my latest is I'm getting my service dog trained again for another podcast, but it's a new thing, and that opens up a whole new thing that you wouldn't know if you didn't have a service animal yourself. So that's, especially if you look as healthy as me.
Yeah, right? Well, that is all that we have time for today. I am going to invite you viewers, please, if you have topics that you guys want to hear about sometime, leave them in the comments. If you liked what you heard today, leave a like. I am really interested to hear stories in which you have had mental illness or physical disability affect your life, some of the ways that you might overcome. Um, I know that I myself am looking for pain management tools. Mom, I don't know if you've got pain management things that
Two,
you're
I
looking
have
for.
3 pain management doctor I've seen 5. Of the 5, I've been able to narrow it down to 3. Of those 3, 2 in particular do my pain medications and my injections. I just got an injection again today in my shoulder.
Mhm.
So yeah, pain management is definitely part of my life, and I don't mind talking about that in the future. The one thing I would like to close out with, Darian, real quick
Mhm.
is when they're commenting, I hope that people don't assume that I've always looked this way and you've always looked the way you have.
Mhm.
There, I have not looked the way I look, and for about a year now, I've looked this way up and even now I've got my hair dyed, but she can tell you from surgeries, it's all very, very gray
Yes.
hair. I was very, very heavy, very overweight. So it's not, just don't make assumptions based on outward appearances, which is normal and natural for people to make those kinds of
Yes.
assumptions.
Especially if
And
we have invisible disability. Yeah.
right, and I have said more than once that actually being smaller like I am actually has caused more pain problems,
Mhm.
than when I was heavier just because, I've got some hip stuff. I had more cushion when I had a bigger behind, to cushion on it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, there's a lot, but, life never stays the same. It's not static. It changes.
Changes for sure.
Get used to change, and you hate change, Darian. I know you struggle with it, but
So
and
much.
so do I, but, change is ha is change is change. I've almost died more than just when you were 9. You know
Mhm.
that as well. So, I've come back and forth from the brink about 3 times now, so who knows? Who knows? Live while you can, do what you can.
Yep, for sure. So, yes, leave a like, leave a comment, share your stories. Any tips you have for pain management, please let us know. And I will see you guys next time on
I was
the
very
episode
honored,
of Dare to Talk. Thank
very
you very
honored.
much.
Yep, I hope
I
you invite me back, not just as your mom, but as a fellow, mental health person myself.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, with that, I'm Dare, and I dare you guys to talk about how you are really feeling today.
And I'm Misty Dawn.